A lot of people have been asking me about Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man and my thoughts on it. And I gotta be honest with you guys, I was really looking forward to this show. I was really excited about it. Now we're pretty far in, and I thought it would be time for me to give you my first thoughts. How does it hold up, especially considering my love of X-Men 97, which is also from Marvel Animation? Let's talk about that. Hello everyone, my name is Amanda, you might know me as Vamp, and today we are going to be talking about Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, a show that I thought was going to be in the MCU, main continuity. It's not, it's alternate, it's kind of weird. I have thoughts on this show for sure. So let's get into it. But before we do, I'm going to try to give you a summary of everything that has happened to this point. A lot has happened. Spoiler warnings in effect, and let's get into everything. I'm gonna try to recap this fast. So we start off the show with Peter getting his powers from a spider bite that is maybe from another dimension or another universe. Something weird is happening with that because it came through a portal with Doctor Strange. He becomes Spider-Man. In this reality, his Uncle Ben dies and he is with Aunt May, very similar to the story that we're used to, but his Aunt May seems more in line and seems to take more inspiration from the MCU version of Aunt May as opposed to the comic book version of Aunt May. This whole show actually feels like it's taking quite a bit of inspiration from the main continuity MCU, and you kind of can see where this show could have been a main continuity MCU, but perhaps they pivoted during production. You can see that in the show, for better and for worse. We're introduced to Peter's best friend, foster kid Nico Minoru, who you might know from the comics. His and Nico's crush, Pearl, who is Peter's old babysitter who's a few years older than him, basically kind of standing in, it seems, for Mary Jane. And we also meet Lonnie Lincoln, who is Pearl's boyfriend, who is an all-star football player, but he's not just a jock, he also cares about academics too, and he actually ends up befriending Peter when he becomes his lab partner, and we also find out he's an all-around really nice guy who just really cares about his family. Peter gets recruited through an internship into Oscorp, where we actually find out that Norman put this internship together with the hopes of finding out Spider-Man, who actually saved his son Harry's life, and so he wants to repay him. And during this internship, Norman does find out that Peter is indeed Spider-Man. However, he reassures him that he will keep his secret and basically just offers his assistance and says, you know, I've been looking for you and I just want to see if there's anything that I can do to help. And so Peter ultimately accepts Norman's help and they become a team. Harry will later find out that Peter is also Spider-Man, and also because of this join Team Spider-Man. Lonnie, meanwhile, is dealing with some family drama, and in order to save his younger brother, he gets pulled into the 1/10 gang, ultimately getting the name in the gang of Tombstone, that being his nickname. We learn that mysterious powerful tech, which has been popping up all over the city, is actually the works of Otto Octavius. Otto Octavius is doing this not because he wants to, he's doing this to make money because he's working on some kind of crazy big project, which I can't wait to see what that'll be. We're introduced to some other Spider-Man villains along the way who honestly are pretty similar to their main continuity counterparts, including the leader of the Scorpion gang, Mac Gargan, who, you guessed it, using Otto's tech becomes just the Scorpion. In the backdrop of all of this is Civil War, the Sokovia Accords, the Superhero Registration Act with Thaddeus Ross and Iron Man, with Norman ultimately reassuring Peter with all of this going on that he'll just take care of the whole superhero registration thing. And yeah, Norman does basically claim that Spider-Man's working for him when he talks to Ross about it. I feel like Norman's got some secrets. That's basically where we're at with most of the show, roughly. Obviously, there's a lot more little things that happen, but that's just a broad strokes synopsis. So how do I feel about this show? What do I think about it? Well, I do like what they seem to be doing by mixing things up with some of the characters. I like how Norman is Peter's benefactor. I think that's really cool. I really like overall what they're doing with Norman here. I just feel like Norman is such a cool character in this, and I really love his voice. I think it's Colman Domingo who does his voice in the show, and he is phenomenal. There's a little bit of Willem Dafoe that I feel like he's got in there, just like on top of everything, just sprinkled on top, but he's really still doing his own thing and it feels like a combination of a few different vibes. I just love it. He sounds kind of creepy, but he also sounds really nice and friendly. It's a cool approach to the character and I'm enjoying that a lot. All in all, I think the voice work in this show is actually really good. There's some emotional parts and the emotion really comes through with what the actors are conveying. I do wish that the animation sometimes matched a little bit more of the emotion because I feel like sometimes the voice work is doing more than the animation is. I will say that. My favorite character so far is actually Tombstone though, which is maybe surprising. I never thought that I would be a huge Tombstone fan, but here we are. I just really like what they're doing with Lonnie Lincoln here. Also, I've seen some discord on the internet surrounding this, so I just wanted to clear this up for people that aren't aware. Lonnie in the comics is African American. He's just albino. Apparently there are some people that are upset that he's black, and I was like, he's kind of always been black, but he was just albino but black, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, I guess he's not albino, so I don't know, maybe that's bothering people. It didn't bother me. I was just like, I think this version of Lonnie Lincoln is cool, and I like what they're doing with building up his origin, which is cooking. It's cooking. Oh boy. I wish Nico in this, though, was more Nico. Getting into some of the things that I'm not as big a fan of, other than sometimes I do feel like the animation, it just doesn't hit as hard. It doesn't fit as well with some things, although I think the action is really good in it, I gotta say. It's really fun to watch. I think that the other thing that I'm not as big a fan of here is Nico. Nico feels like I'm kind of just like, why are you using Nico Minoru, who is a very well-loved character in the comics, who often does not get a ton of spotlight shone on her, so I was excited for her to be in this show, but for most of these shows so far, she hasn't really felt like Nico. She's felt like they just needed a person, and so they were like, I don't know, grab Nico. I don't know if for diversity reasons or, you know what, but the only allusions that I feel we've had to kind of the magical elements of the character, which I really hope they get into more and even get into Nico's origin. I mean, she's a foster kid in this, but is she a foster kid because of everything that happened with her parents, like in the comics? Are we gonna get into some runaway stuff, or are we not getting into any of that? The only things that we've had, other than her being a foster kid, is she has her amulet. She has an amulet that she's wearing. And at one point, when Harry joins Peter and her at the movies, she's kind of like a little uncertain about Harry. And then she kind of like grabs her amulet and is like, it'll be okay. She says something like that. And it was kind of like, seemed like a moment with her in the amulet. And I was like, ooh, is that going to be, are we getting somewhere with that? And then nothing else happened. That, and she has she's a fan of tarot. So that's all we have so far. Hopefully we get more. I feel like they are hinting at it, so I'm hoping there's more, because otherwise I'm gonna kind of be like, why'd you use my girl Nico if you weren't gonna use my girl Nico? You know what I mean? I do feel that the show overall, while it does have some emotional moments, it is very much a teen show, and sometimes it feels a bit juvenile, especially some of the decisions that adults make, especially some of the stuff that Norman is doing. Even though I really like the character, just in terms of some of the story points, I'm like, but why you do that? Namely, one of the things that I had the biggest issue with was when they decide to rework Spider-Man's suit, which admittedly is a fine idea. I understand Norman wants to improve the suit, and he's coming up with all these models, and he's like, I got these other ideas. And he's putting him in all these different suits that are obviously references to the comics. They're deep cuts. If you didn't notice that, it is a fun part of that sequence. But the thing that I just felt was kind of goofy is it's like he's changing the type of bug he is. But why would you do that? He's Spider-Man. Like, why do you need to do that? Doesn't really make a lot of sense in the context. He's giving him suits that actually aren't as good as Peter's homemade suit. Sometimes it feels like they're actually worse. And I understand that's the joke, and so it is goofy and funny, but let's just put this into perspective. This is Norman Osborn. He's a really smart guy himself, and he's also using all the resources of Oscorp, and you're telling me that his suits aren't better ultimately than Peter's suit? I mean, I guess the final suit they come up with, which is obviously a play on the Future Foundation suit, does end up being the hit and ends up being the one that they go with, and it is an improved model ultimately. But just some of the things that they try feels so goofy in how bad they are in comparison to what Peter started with. So yeah, I mean, I'm willing to go along for the goofy ride, so I kind of just accepted it and had fun with it. But it did bother me in the sense that it felt a little illogical in terms of what we're dealing with. And I know this is a superhero story, so what place does logic have? But there are still, you know, rules to the world and things, and I just, yeah, it's obviously for a younger demographic, and that's fine. I can still enjoy the show, and I still am enjoying the show. But I do think it's not as much of a standout for me as something like X-Men 97 was. X-Men 97 just felt bigger. It felt like it had more depth. It was clearly made for adults, but also with the idea of kids in mind, that kids could still enjoy the show. They were thinking about the people that are older that are going to be watching this show. And I just feel like with Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, they weren't really gearing towards that as much. Of course, you know, there is still a lot of fun references for people that are fans of the movies, the comics. You know, if you're just a Spider-Man fan, if you're fans of the series that have come before, I think there's a lot here that you're going to enjoy. Granted, I've also said before that X-Men the Animated Series was really my thing that I loved, and you know, the Spider-Man shows, other than the 60s Spider-Man show, were not really my thing. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, admittedly. And I will also say they do use that. I was excited for them using some of the original 60s theme in the opening credits song, in the theme song for the show, but I actually don't really love it. They like remixed it and like used it as a sample, and I'm kind of just like, it just makes me miss the 60s theme. I love that theme, and it feels a little bit more goofy here. I know it's a goofy theme anyways, but I just feel like they're using it just for my nostalgia, and that's it, which is fine. There's a lot of nostalgia bait to be had with shows like Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man and X-Men 97. And yeah, sometimes it works better for me than it does with other things, but I think that's also sometimes a personal preference of mine. So it's not really a bearing on the show at large. Overall, I would give this one a 3 out of 5 so far. I'm enjoying it. I'm having fun with it, but it's not my favorite thing. And it's not like I'm itching to watch Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Although I am curious to see where the story goes, and I am looking forward to watching the next episodes, but I'm not like, I can't wait. The next episode, I gotta watch that. So that's where I'm at with it, ultimately. It's a good time. I hope by the end of it, I have an even higher rating for it. I hope the ending of this show blows me away, because I think we're building up to a pretty big finale. So that's where I'm at so far. I will come back and give you guys my full thoughts on the show and go a little bit deeper maybe into it with a full review. Let me know what you're thinking of it. Let me know if there are any points that really stood out to you that you love or don't love, or if there's something else you want me to dive into more in this show and talk about more, let me know down in the comments. And if you've missed it, I have been talking about a ton of MCU stuff. Speaking of the MCU, which this doesn't really go into, but it kind of sits around it a little bit, I've been talking about a ton of stuff. You can check it out over here. I'll see you next time, and until then, friends, stay nerdy. Bye!